He had nothing left. No home, no job, no family. Just an old truck and a loyal German shepherd named Rex. One freezing night, while scavenging through a forgotten storage unit, he found something no one else could see. A hidden chest buried beneath the dust and time. Inside wasn't gold or jewels, but something far more powerful. A secret kept for over 70 years. A promise left unfinished. And maybe, just maybe, a message from God himself. What happened next would change his life. Forever. If you believe that miracles can still happen, stay till the end. Don't forget to subscribe, leave a comment, and share this story with someone who needs hope today. Thank you for watching. May God bless you and your family always. The wind howled through the narrow streets of Silverton, a forgotten mining town nestled high in the Colorado Rockies, where winter had no mercy. Snow lay in thick, uneven layers across the roofs, and the few remaining lights from gas stations and diners flickered behind fogged windows. The temperature had dropped below 15 degrees Fahrenheit, and even the air seemed to crack when someone exhaled. The world here felt still, like it was holding its breath, waiting for spring that never quite came. Inside a rusted 1987 Ford F-150, Jack Miller sat hunched over the steering wheel, his breath clouding the windshield. He was 42, tall but worn down by years of labor and loss. His hands, calloused and rough from decades working as a mechanic, were trembling slightly, not from fear, but from cold and exhaustion. His once dark hair had begun to gray near the temples, and a short, uneven beard covered a jaw that had grown sharper as the meals grew fewer. His clothes were layered, a flannel shirt under a torn jacket, and boots that had lost their waterproofing years ago. Jack had the kind of face that carried both strength and weariness. A man who had spent too many nights trying to fix things that no longer worked. Engines, relationships, his own life. He hadn't always lived like this. Once, Jack had a home, a small 2-bedroom house in Denver with a garden his wife Laura loved to tend. She had been a nurse, gentle but pragmatic, with soft brown eyes and a smile that carried quiet resilience. When cancer took her 3 years ago, something inside Jack broke. He tried to keep working, fixing engines at the auto shop, but after the owner sold the business and layoffs came, Jack drifted. He had nowhere to go but forward and nowhere to stay. Beside him, on the torn leather seat, lay Rex, his German shepherd, 6 years old, large and alert even when resting. The dog's coat was thick, a mixture of black and tan, with sharp amber eyes that seemed to read Jack's thoughts. Rex had been a rescue from the local shelter. A dog once trained for search and rescue, dismissed after an injury to his hind leg, left him with a faint limp. He and Jack had found each other when both were unwanted by the world. Rex was loyal in a way humans rarely managed. He never questioned, never judged. He just stayed. Jack rubbed the dog's head and muttered, "We'll make it through this one, buddy." Rex lifted his head slightly, his breath visible in the freezing air, before resting again, trusting his human completely. Every morning, Jack drove around town collecting scrap metal, fixing small engines for cash, or helping the old residents of Silverton, most of them too poor or too stubborn to leave. One of them, Mrs. Hargrove, a frail woman in her 70s with silver hair and skin wrinkled like old parchment, often brought Jack hot coffee in a thermos. She had once run the diner before the tourists stopped coming. Her kindness reminded Jack that not all warmth came from fire. "You can't fix everything, son," she told him one morning, handing him the coffee through his truck window. "But you can fix enough to keep going." Jack had smiled, though the expression didn't quite reach his eyes. That same afternoon, while scanning the local notice board outside the closed post office, he noticed a printed flyer. Storage unit auction, Tuesday 10 a.m., abandoned property as is, cash only. It was the kind of gamble only desperate people took. Jack had $620 left, what remained from selling his last set of mechanic tools. He thought about buying new boots or more fuel, but something inside whispered that maybe, just maybe, this was a chance to start again. On Tuesday morning, under a dull, gray sky, Jack drove to the edge of town, where a cluster of corrugated metal units stood half-buried in snow. A dozen other bidders gathered, bundled in heavy coats, their breath rising like steam. The auctioneer, a heavy-set man named Tom Briggs, with a red face and a voice too loud for the quiet morning, shouted out the rules. You bid, you buy, no refunds. What you see is what you get. Jack stood near the back, hands shoved into his pockets, Rex sitting obediently by his leg. People looked at him curiously. A tall, unshaven man with tired blue eyes, a stray dog, and the air of someone who had nothing left to lose. When the first few units opened, bidders crowded forward, shining flashlights inside. Old furniture, broken toys, forgotten life debris. Then came Unit 19, the last one of the day. The metal door screeched upward, revealing darkness and dust. The light caught on a mess of junk, a broken bicycle, moldy boxes, a cracked dresser, and a torn mattress. A musty smell wafted out. Most people walked away shaking their heads. Trash, someone muttered. But Jack lingered. There was something different about this unit. Maybe it was instinct, or maybe desperation had taught him to look past appearances. He imagined someone's life scattered here, left to rot under the weight of years. Tom called for bids, starting at $300. Silence. Then Jack raised his hand. $400, he said, his voice hoarse. Tom looked surprised. 400 once, twice, and sold to the man with the dog. Jack handed over the cash with shaking fingers. That was nearly all he had left. When the other bidders left, he stood at the entrance, staring at his purchase. The place was freezing, and every breath turned to fog. Rex trotted inside first, nose twitching as he sniffed around the shadows. Jack followed with a flashlight, its weak beam slicing through the gloom. The walls were cold metal, the floor scattered with debris. He started moving boxes toward the door, sorting what could be salvaged. Old tools, rusty cans, a lamp missing its shade. Rex began pawing at the back wall, growling softly. Jack frowned. "What is it, boy?" He shined the flashlight in that direction. The beam revealed a sheet of corrugated metal slightly different in color from the rest, maybe replaced at some point. Rex's tail stiffened, ears perked. He barked once, sharp and insistent. Jack knelt, knocking lightly. The sound was hollow. He dragged a crowbar from a pile of junk and wedged it into the seam. With a creak, the panel loosened, revealing a narrow cavity between the wall and an old wooden beam. Dust and splinters fell as he reached inside and pulled out a small wooden chest, no bigger than a toolbox, wrapped in a brittle tarp. Its surface was carved with faint Nordic runes and the words, "Till dem som hjälper." The letters were uneven, but deliberate. Jack brushed the dust off with his sleeve. "Looks old," he murmured. Rex sat beside him, eyes fixed on the chest. The dog's reflection caught the faint light filtering from the doorway, and for a moment, Jack swore he saw something flicker there, a glint that wasn't just the metal hinge, but something deeper, almost alive. Jack didn't open it. Not yet. He simply held it, feeling the weight of the wood and the chill seeping into his hands. The storm outside had started to rise again, wind hammering against the thin walls of the storage unit. Rex let out a low whine, uneasy. Jack nodded slowly. "Yeah, buddy," he whispered. "I think you're right. There's something here." He locked the chest inside his truck, covered it with an old blanket, and sat in silence for a long time. Outside, snowflakes spiraled under the pale streetlight. Inside, Rex's eyes gleamed with reflected light, steady and knowing. Jack rested his head against the seat, thinking of Laura, of the long road that had led him here. He didn't believe in luck anymore, but maybe fate still had one last thing left for him to find. As the storm raged through the night, the faint glow from the wooden chest seemed to pulse under the blanket, and Rex never once took his eyes off it. Snow had stopped falling by dawn, but the air outside was still brittle and thin, like glass waiting to crack. Jack Miller woke inside his old truck, breath fogging the windshield. The small wooden chest sat on the dashboard, its surface damp from melted frost. Beside him, Rex stirred, his golden brown eyes watching the chest with quiet curiosity. Jack rubbed his hands together, the bones stiff with cold, and said softly, "All right, let's see what kind of ghosts you're hiding." He took the chest into an abandoned garage he sometimes used as shelter, a forgotten place behind a shuttered gas station. The inside smelled of rust and old oil. A metal workbench stood near the window, its surface littered with bolts, broken tools, and a cracked mirror. Jack placed the chest down carefully. The latch gave way with a creak, and the faint scent of cedar and thyme escaped. Inside lay a bundle of aged letters tied with a red string, a leather-bound journal, and a black and white photograph tucked between them. Jack unfolded the photograph first. It showed a man in his 50s, thin but strong, standing among ruins of what looked like a war hospital. His uniform bore the insignia of the Red Cross, and beside him stood a woman holding two small children, their faces smudged with dirt but their eyes bright. The man's expression was both solemn and kind, the kind of face that carried compassion and fatigue in equal measure. The back of the photo had a signature written in elegant, slanted handwriting, Dr. Anders Larsson, Oslo, 1947. Jack sat for a moment, staring at the name. The handwriting was deliberate, confident, but the ink had faded like a voice that hadn't been heard for decades. He picked up the first letter, its envelope sealed with wax that had cracked from age. Inside, the paper was yellowed, but the words were still legible. "To whoever finds this, I leave the story of my promise. My name is Anders Larsson. I am a doctor from Norway who came to America after the war to help rebuild what was lost. There are debts that cannot be repaid and lives that cannot be replaced. I carried something precious, not gold nor jewels, but the hope of many. The funds meant for an orphanage in Arizona. If this chest has found you, then fate has chosen you to finish what I could not." Jack read the words twice, his pulse slowing. He took the leather journal next. The cover was cracked but still strong, its edges darkened with time. Inside were careful entries written in Norwegian and English, alternating between the two languages. The first pages described Anders's journey from Oslo to New York in 1946, the long ship voyage across the Atlantic, and the memories he tried to leave behind. "The war has ended, but I cannot sleep. I see faces of children I could not save. In America, perhaps I can do some good." Jack turned the pages slowly. He wasn't a man of books, but there was something magnetic about this one. Between lines about medicine and travel were glimpses of Anders's humanity, loneliness, faith, and exhaustion. The journal spoke of a woman named Elizabeth, a nurse he met in Chicago, whose kindness restored my faith when I had none left. But as the entries continued, they grew darker. Anders wrote about his health failing, about being robbed once on the road, and about feeling watched. If I do not make it to Arizona, someone must carry the funds to the children. They have suffered enough. Let the money reach them, even if I cannot. Jack's hands trembled slightly as he reached the final entries. His chest felt heavy. The man's words, though written 70 years ago, echoed the same pain he had carried since losing his wife and daughter. He closed the journal and stared at the floor for a long time. Rex came closer, resting his head against Jack's knee, as if sensing the storm of thoughts inside his owner. Jack scratched behind the dog's ear absently. He just wanted to help some kids, Jack murmured. Guess that's what broke him. At that moment, the garage door creaked open. Jack turned sharply, hand instinctively reaching for the wrench on the table. But it was only Sarah Green, the woman who owned the property. Sarah was in her late 50s, short and sturdy, with sun-weathered skin and a tumble of curly gray hair tucked under a wool hat. Her blue eyes were sharp and lively, though deep in them was the weariness of someone who'd spent a lifetime working hard for little. She wore a thick denim jacket and carried a thermos in one hand. "Jack, you scared me half to death," she said, voice husky from years of smoking. "You still sleeping in that tin can outside?" Jack relaxed and nodded. "Yeah, just needed a place to read." Sarah stepped inside, looking around at the scattered tools and the open chest. "You find something interesting in there?" she asked, her tone curious but not prying. Sarah was known in Silverton for her blunt kindness. She'd lost her husband to a mining accident years ago and had learned that pity was less useful than practical help. Jack hesitated. Old letters. A man's journal. Looks like he didn't make it where he was going. Sarah poured coffee into a dented metal cup and handed it to him. "Most folks don't make it where they think they're going," she said softly. "But sometimes they leave something worth finding." Her words lingered in the cold air. After she left, Jack sat there again, staring at the journal. The idea took hold quietly, like the first spark in a cold hearth. Maybe he could find this orphanage, or what was left of it. Maybe he could finish what Anders started. He searched the last few pages again and found a hand-drawn map. The ink was faint but readable. A rough route from New Mexico toward Arizona, marked with notes about terrain and towns. Red Mesa Orphanage, last known address. Jack looked out the frosted window. The mountains glowed under a weak sun. "Arizona," he whispered. Rex's ears twitched at the sound. "Guess we're heading south." He packed the letters and journal into his duffel bag, securing the chest under the truck seat. Before leaving, he took one last look at the photograph. The children in the picture smiled despite the ruins behind them. It reminded him of Emma, his little girl who used to smile even on the days when Laura's treatments left her weak. Jack started the engine. The truck groaned, then came to life. Rex settled beside him, tail thumping softly. As they pulled out of Silverton, the road stretched long and white before them, cutting through endless snowfields. Somewhere far ahead, in the deserts of Arizona, waited an unfinished promise, one that a Norwegian doctor had carried with faith, and now a broken mechanic would carry with love. The chest rattled softly under the seat as if agreeing. Rex barked once, the sound echoing against the canyon walls. Jack smiled faintly for the first time in months. "Let's see where this takes us, partner," he said. And for the first time, the road didn't feel empty. The following morning, the mountains of Colorado glimmered under a weak sun that did little to thaw the bitter cold. Jack Miller loaded his few belongings into the back of his weathered Ford truck, an old duffel bag filled with spare clothes, the Norwegian journal carefully wrapped in canvas, and a thermos of coffee that Sarah Green had insisted he take. Rex, his German shepherd, jumped into the passenger seat, his tail brushing against the cracked leather. The road ahead was long, winding south toward Arizona, cutting through valleys where snow turned to dust. Jack hadn't been on a real journey in years. The hum of the truck engine was the only sound as the Rockies grew smaller behind him. Rex watched the passing landscape, ears twitching to every strange sound. Jack reached out to pat his head. "We're chasing a ghost, buddy," he said, eyes on the road. "A good ghost, I think." By late afternoon, the snow began to thin. The ground turned from white to brown, and patches of dry grass appeared along the highway. They stopped at a small diner on the edge of New Mexico, Maggie's place, according to the fading sign. It looked like something out of another decade. Peeling paint, neon lights that flickered half dead, and a row of dusty trucks parked out front. Inside, the air smelled of coffee and bacon grease. A jukebox hummed softly in the corner, playing a tune from the 70s. The waitress, Maggie Turner, was a woman in her late 40s, tall and broad-shouldered, with auburn hair tied back under a bandana. Her skin was tanned from years of desert sun, and she wore a faded denim apron with a name tag that simply said, Maggie. She moved with the confidence of someone who'd spent her life running a place on her own, her sharp green eyes missing nothing. "Sit wherever you want," she said, voice raspy but warm. "We don't get many travelers this time of year." Jack took a booth near the window. Rex lay down under the table, head resting on his paws. Maggie brought over a cup of black coffee and studied Jack for a moment. "You look like a man who's been driving longer than he should." Jack smiled faintly. "You could say that." "What's your story?" she asked, crossing her arms. "Everyone who comes through here's got one." Jack hesitated. He wasn't used to talking about himself anymore. "Just chasing something that someone else lost," he said finally. Maggie raised an eyebrow but didn't press. "Sounds like the start of a country song." She poured him another cup of coffee before walking away. While eating, Jack took out the old journal, flipping to the map Anders Larsen had drawn. Maggie noticed the weathered leather and leaned closer. "That looks older than you," she said, half joking. "Belonged to a doctor," Jack explained, "from Norway. He came to America after the war, tried to deliver money to a children's home in Arizona. Never made it." Her expression softened. "My father used to talk about that," she said quietly. "He worked for the Red Cross. There was a rumor about a man who disappeared near the canyons east of Holbrook. Folks said he carried something valuable, but others said he was just another lost soul." Jack straightened in his seat. "East of Holbrook? That's on this map." Maggie shrugged. "The desert doesn't forgive mistakes. If you're heading that way, take care. There's nothing out there but wind and silence." Before he left, Maggie handed him a wrapped sandwich and a slip of paper with an address. "If you reach Holbrook, look for a man named Eli Porter," she said. "Old, quiet type. Used to work in the mines. Knows every canyon and ghost town out there. He might help you find that orphanage, if it ever existed." Jack thanked her, paid his bill, and headed out. The sun was dipping behind the desert hills, painting the sky in shades of crimson and gold. As they drove, the road turned from pavement to cracked asphalt, then to dirt. The truck rattled, but Jack didn't slow down. He followed the coordinates scribbled in the margin of the journal, the trail leading them deeper into nowhere. Night fell fast in the desert. Jack stopped by a cluster of boulders and made camp. The stars overhead were clearer than he'd seen in years, millions of them burning cold and distant. He fed Rex a can of dog food and shared a piece of bread himself. As he sat beside the fire, he opened one of Anders's letters again. This one was addressed, "To my daughter, if ever found. My dear Liv, I do not know if you will ever see these words. I came here to deliver hope, but perhaps I will be the one who needs saving. If I cannot return, let this story be my offering. The children must not be forgotten." Jack's throat tightened. He wondered if the daughter had ever known her father's fate. The letter felt like a bridge between two men separated by 70 years, but bound by grief and guilt. Rex stirred suddenly, ears perked. The dog growled softly, staring into the dark. Jack reached for his flashlight and scanned the horizon. Only sand and shadows. But something flickered. Movement far off, near a ridge. A figure, or maybe a trick of the light. Probably coyotes, Jack muttered, though his gut told him otherwise. The next morning, they reached the outskirts of Holbrook. The town was small, mostly motels and gas stations along the old Route 66. The desert wind carried dust through the empty streets. Jack parked outside a repair shop with a faded sign that read, "Porter's Auto and Supply." Inside, the smell of oil and iron was thick. Behind the counter stood Eli Porter, a man in his late 60s with a wiry build, white hair tied in a short ponytail, and a scar cutting across his left cheek. His blue-gray eyes were sharp but tired. He wore a flannel shirt rolled up to the elbows, revealing arms still strong from years of labor. "You the one Maggie sent?" Eli asked without looking up from his workbench. "Yeah," Jack replied. "She said you might know something about the old orphanage near Red Mesa." Eli stopped what he was doing and looked up. His gaze lingered on Jack for a moment, then shifted to Rex, who stood quietly beside him. "That place," he said finally, "ain't much left. Just ruins. People stopped going there long ago." Jack laid the journal on the counter, open to the map. Eli studied it, his brow furrowing. "That's old," he murmured. "But these markings, they line up with the canyons east of town. You'll need to follow the dry riverbed past the old mining road." "Can you show me?" Jack asked. Eli hesitated, then nodded. "Meet me at dawn. I'll take you as far as I can. After that, it's all on you." As Jack left the shop, he glanced back at the desert horizon. The wind carried fine dust that shimmered under the setting sun. The trail was calling, and for the first time in years, he felt like he had a direction, something more than survival. Rex barked once, as if agreeing. Jack smiled faintly. Tomorrow, we find what he couldn't. The sun had already begun to set when Jack and Eli Porter returned to Holbrook. The wind that swept across the desert carried fine red dust, coating the truck like dried blood. Their search that day had been long and fruitless. They had followed the dry riverbed deep into the canyons, only to find ruins swallowed by time, crumbled stone walls, a rusted swing set, and the faint outline of what might once have been a courtyard. But no trace of the orphanage remained, and no sign of where Dr. Anders Larsson's journey had ended. Eli wiped his forehead with a rag and leaned against the truck. "That's as far as I go, Jack," he said. His voice carried the tired gravel of a man who had lived too long under the desert sun. "That place, it's cursed ground. Folks say whoever digs too deep out here ends up paying for it." His gray eyes met Jack's. "You should leave it be." Jack nodded, though the words didn't take root. "Thanks for helping me," he said quietly. "Guess I'll try the county office tomorrow, see if there's any record left." Eli gave a slow nod, then handed him a folded piece of paper. "If you go, ask for Deputy Carter. He's one of the few who still gives a damn about what happened out there. But be careful who else you talk to. News travels fast in small towns." Jack didn't think much of that warning then. He should have. That evening, he parked his truck behind a small motel off Route 66. The neon sign flickered with the words, "Desert Star Inn." The owner, Mrs. Dolores Finch, was a stout woman in her 60s with short gray curls and kind brown eyes magnified behind round glasses. She spoke with a thick southwestern drawl and wore a floral dress that looked 2 decades out of fashion. "No pets allowed," she said when she first saw Rex, but when the dog wagged his tail and pressed gently against her leg, she sighed. "All right, just this once. But don't let him on the bed." Jack smiled faintly. "Yes, ma'am." He paid for one night, cleaned Rex's wound from a cut he'd gotten on a sharp rock earlier that day, and lay down with his back against the wall. Outside, wind rattled the windows. Rex rested near the door, eyes half open, always alert. The next morning, Jack went to the Holbrook County Records Office, a beige concrete building that looked like it had been built to survive both time and boredom. Inside, he met Deputy Neil Carter, a man in his late 30s with neatly trimmed dark hair and the square jaw of someone who took his badge seriously. His uniform was pressed, his boots polished, and his handshake firm. But there was something cautious in his eyes, as if he'd seen too many people cross lines that couldn't be uncrossed. Jack explained about the journal, the map, and the orphanage. Carter listened in silence, arms crossed. "Dr. Anders Larson," he repeated, thinking. "My grandfather used to talk about him. Said a Red Cross doctor went missing around here in the late 40s. Search parties never found a thing. A couple years later, scavengers found bones out near Red Mesa, but they weren't human." He pulled a file from the cabinet, blowing off a thin layer of dust. "We had reports, decades ago. People claimed to see lights near the ruins, hear crying. Most dismissed it as ghost stories." He paused. "But a few years back, a construction company tried to dig near the site. The project shut down after 2 workers disappeared. It's not a place folks go anymore." Jack frowned. "Then maybe that's exactly where I need to go." Carter studied him for a long moment. "If you find anything, bring it straight here," he said. "And keep it quiet. Some people in this town don't want old secrets dragged up." Jack nodded, thanked him, and left. What he didn't notice was the pair of men sitting in a dusty pickup across the street, watching him through tinted windows. That night, the motel was quiet. Jack spread out the journal on the table under the yellow lamplight, tracing the last line Anders had written. "If I am lost, the desert will know my truth." He thought about how much the doctor must have carried. Hope, guilt, a sense of duty that never reached its end. Rex lifted his head suddenly, ears twitching. Jack froze. A crunch of gravel outside. Then another. Before he could move, the door burst open. 2 men stormed in, faces half hidden by scarves and desert goggles. One tall and heavy-set, with a sunburned neck and a scar under his eye. The other leaner, nervous, his hand gripping a crowbar. "Where's the box?" the tall one demanded. Jack reached instinctively for the lamp, swinging it forward. The light shattered, plunging the room into chaos. Rex lunged, teeth flashing, clamping onto the tall man's arm. The man yelled, slamming Rex into the wall, but the dog didn't let go. Jack grabbed the smaller attacker, shoving him backward into the dresser. The fight was messy, desperate. A gunshot tore through the room, deafeningly loud. Rex yelped, a sharp, pained sound that made Jack's blood run cold. The men stumbled toward the door as Jack lunged after them, but they were gone before he could see their faces clearly, their truck engine fading into the night. Jack fell to his knees beside Rex. The dog was bleeding from his shoulder, the fur around it dark and wet. "Stay with me, boy," Jack whispered, tearing his flannel shirt into strips to press against the wound. Rex's breathing was ragged, but his eyes were still open, focused, determined. He tried to stand, wobbling, then nudged Jack's leg as if urging him to move. Jack realized then, Rex was trying to lead him. Despite the pain, the dog limped toward the open door, nose to the ground, following the faint scent trail through the snow-dusted gravel behind the motel. Jack grabbed the flashlight and stumbled after him. The night air burned his lungs, and the cold bit through his torn shirt, but he kept going. The tracks led toward the dry riverbed, illuminated faintly by the half-moon. Jack could barely see, but Rex pressed forward, slow but steady, until they reached the edge of an abandoned rest stop. There, beneath a flickering street lamp, lay a single item, the small wooden chest. The thieves had dropped it in their escape. Jack knelt beside it, trembling with relief and fury. "You did it," he whispered. Rex sat down heavily, panting, his tail thumping weakly once before going still. Jack wrapped him in his jacket, carrying him back toward the truck. By the time they reached the motel again, dawn had started to creep over the horizon. The chest sat on the seat beside Rex, who rested his head on Jack's lap. His breathing steadied as the first light of morning touched his fur. Jack stared out the windshield, eyes glassy, whispering to the rising sun, "No one's taking this from us again." Outside, the desert stretched endlessly, quiet and golden. Inside the truck, man and dog sat together, blood and dust binding them in something stronger than fear, a promise, reborn through loyalty and pain. The morning after the attack, sunlight spilled across the desert like a quiet promise. Jack sat beside Rex in the back of the truck, his jacket wrapped around the injured dog. The old Ford's engine rumbled as it carried them toward Holbrook County Hospital. The sky was a pale blue, sharp against the red horizon, and for the first time in weeks, the world felt calm again. Rex rested his head on Jack's lap, eyes half closed but alert, breathing slow and steady. His fur, matted with dried blood, had begun to stiffen, but his spirit hadn't dimmed. The vet at the small animal clinic, Dr. Evelyn Shaw, met them at the entrance. Dr. Shaw was a tall woman in her early 40s, with auburn hair tied back in a loose braid and eyes the color of storm clouds. Her hands were steady, her voice calm, traits honed by years of treating both wounded pets and the people who couldn't afford to lose them. "Bring him in," she said, guiding Jack to the examination table. "You did good keeping pressure on the wound. He's lost some blood, but he's strong." As she worked, Jack sat silently, watching her clean the gash and stitch it closed. She hummed softly under her breath, a habit she said helped her patients relax, human or otherwise. "He'll need rest," she said, glancing at Jack. "And so will you." Jack managed a faint smile. "Rest isn't something I'm good at." "Then learn," she replied, without looking up. By evening, Rex was resting comfortably on a blanket near Jack's cot. Dr. Shaw gave Jack a small cot in the back room of the clinic to sleep on, refusing payment when he offered. "You can pay me by keeping him alive," she said. There was kindness in her voice, but also a firmness that suggested she'd seen too many people walk away from those who depended on them. 2 days later, Deputy Neil Carter came to visit. He stood by the clinic doorway, hat in hand, the desert dust still clinging to his boots. His jaw looked tighter than before, his eyes shadowed with guilt. "We caught the men who attacked you," he said. "They were small-time thieves out of Flagstaff. Claimed they heard talk about some treasure hidden out by Red Mesa. Someone must have leaked your story." Jack frowned. "Someone from town? Maybe. News like that travels faster than sense around here." Carter sighed. "The sheriff's sending the chest to the state office. They'll contact the consulate in Norway. You'll probably want to be there when they open it officially." Jack nodded. "I'll go wherever that thing leads. I owe the man who carried it." Carter hesitated, then said quietly, "You did good, Miller. You and that dog. Folks around here could use a story like yours." 3 weeks passed. Rex healed slowly, his limp returning but his spirit unchanged. Jack stayed busy helping around the clinic, repairing pipes, repainting walls, fixing the old generator. Dr. Shaw joked that she'd found herself a live-in handyman. When a letter arrived from the Norwegian Red Cross, the whole town seemed to notice. The letter confirmed Dr. Anders Larsson's identity and his unfinished mission from 1947. The funds and artifacts found within the chest, coins, letters of donation, and medical records, were authenticated as part of a post-war humanitarian relief effort. The Norwegian government, together with a local American charity, announced the creation of the Larsson Promise Foundation, a fund dedicated to helping orphaned and displaced children in the American Southwest. The story spread quickly. A regional newspaper sent a reporter, Tommy Reyes, a young man in his late 20s with dark hair, olive skin, and a camera slung permanently around his neck. He spoke fast, moved faster, and carried an energy that filled the room. "You're the mechanic, right? The guy who found it?" he said, setting up his tripod outside the clinic. "Mind if I get a few photos of you and the dog?" Jack, uncomfortable under the attention, agreed only after Tommy promised the article would focus on Dr. Larsson's legacy, not the so-called treasure. The photo that ran 2 days later showed Jack sitting on the clinic steps, Rex at his side, a faint smile on his face as sunlight washed over them. The headline read, "The Promise Fulfilled. Mechanic and his dog complete doctor's mission after 75 years." A month later, Jack received an invitation to attend the dedication ceremony of a new children's home built near Prescott, Arizona. The building, a modest but sturdy brick structure surrounded by desert blooms, bore a small bronze plaque at its entrance. "The Larsson Promise Home, for those who carry hope across time." When Jack arrived, the event had already drawn a small crowd, local officials, volunteers, and children from nearby shelters. The sound of laughter drifted through the courtyard, bright and unrestrained. Jack stood near the entrance, hands in his pockets, feeling slightly out of place. Dr. Shaw found him there, smiling gently. "You did this," she said. "I just found a box," he replied. "No," she said. "You found what it meant." Rex trotted among the children, tail wagging, letting them tug gently at his ears. His limp didn't slow him down. The kids adored him instantly. Jack watched as one little boy, no older than 6, hugged the dog's neck and whispered something in his ear. For a moment, Jack thought of Emma, his daughter, and the way she used to cling to his arm when thunderstorms frightened her. The ache that followed was soft this time. Not pain, but memory healing itself. Later that evening, as the sun dipped low and the guests began to leave, Jack sat on the porch steps of the new home. The desert around them glowed gold and amber, the kind of light that made even shadows look gentle. Rex lay beside him, head resting on Jack's leg, eyes half closed. The wind carried the laughter of children, playing in the distance. Jack glanced down at the dog. "You think he made it?" he murmured. "Dr. Larson, you think he found peace?" Rex's tail thumped once against the porch. Jack smiled faintly. "Yeah, me too." The door opened behind him. Dr. Shaw stepped out, her arms folded. "We could use someone like you here," she said. "The building's new, but things break fast when they're loved hard. You'd have plenty to fix." Jack chuckled. "You're offering me a job?" "I'm offering you a home," she replied. He looked out at the horizon, the long road that had carried him from cold mountains to burning desert, from loss to something that felt like purpose. "All right," he said softly. "I think we'll stay a while." The last rays of sunlight settled on them. Jack leaned back, watching the horizon fade into dusk. Rex shifted closer, his fur warm against Jack's leg. Somewhere behind them, the laughter of children rose again, pure and unbroken. Jack whispered, barely audible against the wind, "The real treasure isn't buried, boy. It's here, always was." When the sun set behind the desert hills, Jack realized something profound, that miracles don't always come wrapped in gold or silver. Sometimes they come quietly, through loyalty, through kindness, through a wounded dog that refuses to give up, or through a stranger who decides to care. What happened to Jack and Rex wasn't just the rediscovery of a forgotten treasure. It was a reminder that God's grace often hides in the small moments we overlook. The treasure of Dr. Larson wasn't buried beneath the earth. It was the love that continued to grow long after he was gone. Maybe like Jack, you too are walking through your own kind of desert, tired, uncertain, or searching for meaning. But remember, no road is ever too long when faith walks beside you. God doesn't always answer our prayers in thunder or light. Sometimes He sends a loyal friend, a quiet sunrise, or a chance to start again. So if this story touched your heart, if it reminded you of hope, redemption, or the simple beauty of love, then take a moment to share it. Comment below about a time when you witnessed a small miracle. Subscribe to our channel to hear more stories of faith, courage, and the bonds that make us human. And as you go about your day, may the Lord bless you and keep you. May He shine His light on your path, and may He remind you, as He reminded Jack, that the greatest treasures are not found in the ground, but in hearts that still believe.